Good evening. I would like to call to order the October 20th, 2025 Lake Washington School Board Study Session. Let the record reflect that all board members are present, and we have one of our student reps, Humsini. First item on the agenda is the 5th Comprehensive High School evaluation, and is that going to roll right into enrollment update? Yes, those are our 2 items on the agenda for tonight. So Dr. Holman.
Yeah, they really are distinctly connected. And so Associate Superintendent Posthumus will go over some of the timeline related to our conversations about a 5th Comprehensive High School. But really, as we were going through that process and really determining what's the pathway and next steps that the board would like to consider, we all kind of came to an agreement that waiting until after the October 1 enrollment data would give us the best opportunity to choose a pathway to go down. And so tonight, while yes, there will be discussion about a 5th Comprehensive High School, the lion's share of this presentation really is about enrollment here in Lake Washington, our surrounding districts, and because that not only impacts this, but also just in general, the projected enrollment decline that we know that we've had over the last few years is really coming to fruition. So with that, I'll hand it over to Associate Superintendent Posthumus to walk us through the presentation.
Let me get my mic on. Thank you very much. So as Dr. Holman said, I'll be first focused on kind of providing an overall enrollment update. I have lots of good data to share. So October 1, as for our district and all districts across the state, is the official enrollment count for school districts. Our official count as of October 1st is 30,155 students, head count. So we, enrollment is a key driver of both our revenues and expenditures. So when we put our budget together, we did anticipate a decline in enrollment from about 30,640 students. That red bar is our budget. So we budgeted 30,356 students. Well, our actual enrollment in October was 30,155. So we are below our budget of by 201 students, and I'll get into the details on that in some future slides. And it represents a decrease of 485 students from the 24-25 school year. So this chart provides kind of the changes broken up by elementary, middle, and high school, really, and we've been tracking kind of the changes since the pandemic, since that was a key date for many school districts in changing kind of enrollment. Our district was growing. In fact, the fall of 19, we grew by 1,000 students, and then since the pandemic, we've been declining ever so slightly. So this chart shows the blue portion of the bar is represents our elementary schools, and we have lost over 2,000 students since 2019. So our elementary enrollment is down 15%. Our middle school, which is the orange portion of the bar, is fairly level, so really very small change, just down about 0.04%, and or actually I think it should be increased 0.04%. And then our high school has increased, that's the red portion of the bar, increased by 14.4%. These numbers don't include our skills center and our specialized programs. But what we do know is that fewer students in our elementary will eventually means fewer students moving up to our middle schools and high schools. So this just provides additional detail about our budgeted head count versus our October 1 enrollment. So you can see that our overall, just our elementary, middle, and high school enrollment is down 271 students from what we budgeted. You can see that 104 students relate to the elementary, and about half of that is kindergarten. And then in the high school, we're down 203 students. And then that's offset by our Skills Center program, which is, and our ALE, which are increasing, and those, we spend the revenue, those are self-supporting programs, and so we spend what revenue we receive. So, but overall enrollment down 201. Now, just a reminder, we are funded on average annual FTE. Right now, we've got kind of a range of what we're estimating, because looking at our trends, we kind of look at both a one-year trend and a three-year trend, and they're showing different differences. And so we really need to get more months under our belt with the enrollment so we can get a better idea of where our average annual FTE, but we think it will be, again, at the most down 200 FTE, which will affect our funding. And that represents about $2.3 million in funding. Okay, and then this slide is really just some of our other programs, and these also drive both revenue and expenditures. And so our CTE program, very little change there other than in Skills Center. And again, this is comparing budgeted, and this time it's average annual FTE to our October average annual FTE. And then our special education, you can see that preschool does show lower than we planned, but that is normal for preschool. We're usually low in the fall, and then they grow during the year. So our average annual will be anticipated to be closer to our budget. But I want to highlight kind of the ones at the bottom, our ML program, and I've got some other slides on these, but our ML program is down in enrollment, though increase in exit. So students are evaluated and they're exited out of the program. So that's kind of a good news that we have more students exiting the program. So, and then Running Start, that represents FTE as well, is up 156 FTE. So, and I'll show a later slide that will show total head count. And so we do think some of our decrease in secondary is related to the increase in Running Start. So one of the things, though, because that we are typically, since we are not typically under our projections at high school, we wanted to kind of understand more about what changed. So I know there's a lot of information, data on this slide, so I'm going to get my pointer going. And so we also wanted to kind of understand more about what changed and if any federal decisions could be impacting our enrollment. And so when we put our high school staffing together, our enrollment, it is based on, we use March registrations as a base. We take our March registrations, we estimate based on historical trends what our October enrollment will be, and that's what we use for our budget and our staffing. And so we asked our data services team to dig into the data and analyze kind of what happened between our March registrations and October enrollment. And could they tell us how many students were registered in March and then where those students went in October? And so the first two columns, and again, this data is broken out by our race, ethnicity categories, and then also broken out by different service categories for special education, for multilingual, and then free and reduced. So this first column is we had 9,700 students registered in our high schools for fall in the spring. And then this is the percentage by the categories of the students that were registered. This column represents. And then these next columns were how many students were registered in March were also here in October. So we had 9,700 students registered in March, and by October we had about 9,200 students, 9,169. And then this column represents those students registered, the percentage by category of those students registered. And so then basically the difference is 580 students left between registration and October. And so, and then the percentage of those students. And so really what's highlighted in the last column is those are the areas that students were unenrolled at a higher proportion than other, again, race, ethnicity, or service types. So you can see, again, so our Black, Hispanic, unenrolled at a higher percent than, for example, our Asian or white families. And then our ML students and our free and reduced students and unenrolled at a higher percentage than, for example, students who receive special education services. Now, you might ask the question, how does this compare to prior? Because that may happen every year, we don't know. And this also, I just want to be clear, this is about students who left. We also have students come over the summer, so we didn't bring in that data. So this is a snapshot really looking kind of in one piece of data. And so how does this compare to prior? This is the first time we've ran this report and that we've asked the data team, so I can't really tell you if this is a normal trend, if this is a new trend. So that would be, so we did look at the data, but again, when it's a one-year snapshot, it's hard to know if this is a trend or not. So we will, keep asking for this data each year and see if we can see if there's any trends. So this slide breaks out the 580 students. You can see the 580 total down here by their withdrawal code. So we have lots of different codes that tell us, where did the students go? And so the majority out of the 580, kind of the biggest reasons, and this is by class year, so 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. And so the biggest reason is transferring out to another Washington district. And then another large group, unfortunately, is transfers, but we don't have confirmation of where they went. Another group is, 80 students transferred out of the state. So those are kind of the biggest reasons for those. So.
In transfer unconfirmed, we're required to have confirmation from the receiving school that a student has enrolled. And that doesn't always happen by October 1. And so that's data that is always changing. It's always evolving. And so that's true of our 2025 graduation rate that we'll share with the board as well. The work related to transfers unconfirmed was quite exceptional this year. The amount of work that went into making sure that we could identify as many students as possible.
Director Stewart?
Just a quick question. I'm not sure it really has too much relevance, but do we know how many, if we looked at the state population in Washington, is the state population actually declining? Is this area declining? And I'm not talking about students, I'm just talking about regular population, which might have an impact on this. Just a thought.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I know we get every year an update, the census in King County. You'll get an update, for example, what's the population change in King County. I don't have that off the top of my head, but yeah. I think we are slightly increasing each year. It hasn't decreased, but, our city populations are certainly increasing, but I'll get specific data, so. Okay, so the other thing, so I shared kind of high level where we are for enrollment, and this chart shows overall, or the earlier chart showed our overall enrollment. This breaks out the change by grade level from last year to this year. So this column represents October of 24. The next column represents October of 25 and the difference. And so you can see, just comparing prior year to this year, the majority of the decline is in our elementary schools. Middle school is fairly level, and then high school decreased by 56 students. So overall, from the prior year, 521 head count, and then with our specialized programs, it nets to 485. And then this shows our Running Start head count change of 185 students. And so you can also see that out of, for elementary, kindergarten, basically our K-3 staffing is representing the majority of those declines. And then, as we look further into the numbers, one of the things I like to, scan through is what do we notice about move ahead, or what we call grade progression? How do students move from first grade to second grade to third grade? And so I just pull that out. And so when you actually kind of scan through that, and this last column represents the cohort, what I call cohort percentage. And so we are very close. It's interesting. So anything over 1 means that we grew slightly in that grade level, but you can see that for most of our grades, first to second, second to third, we retained our students. And so they're all 1 or greater. And then what is typical is in, 10th to 11th and 11th to 12th, students do go to Running Start. And so those percentages of 0.89, 0.96 are typical. And what is untypical is really the kindergarten and first grade cohort. In the past, we've had over 10% growth between kindergarten and first grade. And so that's a trend we're going to have to continue to look at. And so 33% of the overall kind of decline in our enrollment is due to the cohort change, which includes Running Start, and 66% of our decline is really because of the difference between we're graduating a class of 2,100 and we're bringing in a class of 1,700. So you can see, this grade band group, prior to the pandemic, our kindergarten classes were about 2,400 students. And so you can see this grade band group of 7th to 10th graders is 2,400 to 2,500 per class. And then when you get to 3rd to 6th grade, it's now 2,300 to 2,400 per class. And then when you look at 1st and 2nd grade, it's 2,000 to 2,100 per class. So these smaller classes are going to continue to have implications for our enrollment in future years. Yes.
Mark, this might partially answer your question. Last week, Superintendent Reichtel held a statewide call. He does that on a monthly basis, and shared some data related to this at the state level. I have it here on my laptop. In 2018-19, we had the same number of kindergarten students as we did seniors in high school. Today, we have 15,000 less kindergartners than we do seniors in high school. So that's one data element. We have significantly more 18-year-olds than 5-year-olds. That's essentially the same data. And he also showed the birth rate data that you all have seen, the trend for Lake Washington. The state hit a peak of 90,000 births in 2016, and by 2023 we're down 1,000 annually. We're at 80,000, or excuse me, 10,000 down. We're at 80,000 births in 2023. And so when you ask, is this really a state issue? Yes.
Okay.
It's also a national issue and a global issue
I've seen it.
of declines in birth rates.
We haven't seen a burgeoning of the private schools around here at all, I don't think either, so.
No, it's not. I don't believe that private schools had all this extra space that they could accommodate students. Okay, so then the next 3 slides are really just kind of snapshots. I've talked about some of the data I've already shared, but this shows Running Start enrollment over time. So 2020, which we had 933 head count, was kind of our peak. And so we've actually hit that peak in 2024, and then 2025 exceeded. That's a 20% increase from prior year. And this does include, again, both full-time students who are enrolled in Running Start, both full-time and part-time. Then this provides some history of our ML program. So you can see that it's been fairly stable as a percentage of total enrollment. I mean, slightly down 0.5%, but in the 11% range. But our enrollment did decrease, about 5.8% over last year. But as I explained, we increased our exited students, increased 19% from 1776 to 2115. So that's just history over time for ML. And then the last slide is our special education program. So we have our preschool students. Again, just a reminder that the October number is typically low at the beginning of the year. Our K-22 enrollment is really, again, 3 students less than it was last year, so not a significant change. And so we're still hovering at that 8%, 8.8, 9% of enrollment. Oh, and then last slide is our free and reduced eligibility. The October data is preliminary right now, but we have a slight increase in our eligibility, and again, our percentage has been increasing over time. So, and that once we will have that updated probably by the end of the month. But yeah, we're over 4,000. That's, I think, the first time in a while we've been over 4,000 free and reduced students. So, yeah. So and then the other slide I want to share is we get a lot of questions. How do we compare to other districts? Are other districts losing kids, gaining kids? And so this chart shows King County districts and other kind of large districts that we compare to. And so our decline is kind of consistent, or, we didn't lose as many students as some of our neighbors, such as Issaquah and Kent. And Seattle lost the same percentage of students. Other than Bellevue, whose enrollment increased slightly, again, we're very comparable. If you remember, Bellevue lost a significant number of students right immediately after the pandemic. So this is kind of their kind of catching back up. So they're still lower than they were at the beginning of the pandemic, but all right. And again, this is September enrollment just because we don't have October. We have to wait until OSPI posts all the other district information on their website. So one of the things we are looking at is our choice transfer, and choice transfer represents our non-resident students, so students families that live outside of our district. If they would like to transfer into our schools, that's called a choice transfer. So we are looking at those and updating our policies. The policy numbers are 3131 and 3141, and we are exploring options for allowing a limited kind of feeder pattern pathway. So, because one of the concerns that parents have had is that they, might be able to get into an elementary school, but then they aren't able to get into our middle and high school. So we're looking at are there middle and high schools that, if they have the capacity, we could offer a feeder pattern where they could be guaranteed kind of enrollment through that particular feeder pattern. So we'll be working to update those policies in the next couple of weeks. So the other thing, as you know, we work with Flow Analytics. They are a demographer, and they help us do a lot of visuals. They provide our 10-year forecast for us each January, February. And they've worked with us for so long that We sent them our October data, and within a day or two, he provided us with some charts. Normally we would have to wait until our forecast, but I just opened my inbox and here were some interesting data. So apologize for some of the small numbers here, but so this top part of the slide is the kindergarten numbers from our January forecast. And what they do is they take the births and then 5 years later compare that to our enrolled kindergarten. And so you can see that since the pandemic, we've been enrolling about 80 to 83% of the students that were born 5 years prior. And so when they did the forecast for us, they also assumed 83%, and that generated a forecast of 1,900 kindergarten students. Well, when we did our kindergarten registrations in the March timeframe, we saw that we were not registering that many. And so when we put our budget together, we budgeted only 1,800 students, not the 1,900 students that Flo projected. But based on our actual enrollment, which was 1,762 kindergarten students, that's this number here, that represents 76% of births 5 years prior. So that's about a 6% change from the prior year. So that's just, again, a trend we're going to have to keep our eye on. Yeah, Mark.
Quick question. With the requirement not to join or start school until second grade, if I recall correctly, have we ever tracked just the second grade, to be quite frank, to see if that number is changing at all? And that's, to me, I don't know how many in this district would actually be affected by that, but I thought I'd ask.
I believe that's on the next slide.
Yeah. So, well, we haven't compared it to births. We could do that. We've done that with ninth grade, so we could certainly compare second grade to births. And we do get a slight uptick, and again, we'll show that in a future slide, from first grade to second grade. This slide that Flo put together kind of shows our, historical enrollment by grade level. And what they do is the peach shaded cells show the highest enrollment point for that grade level. And the blue shaded cells show the lowest enrollment point for that grade level. I'm going to have to tongue twist. Blue shaded cells show the lowest point for that grade level. So as you can see, K3 has the lowest point this year, right? The K3 enrollment is at its lowest point, while the 7th through 12th grade are at their highest point kind of in the last 2 years. And so just another, again, the longer term impact means continued lower enrollment. And so this chart is what they call grade progression ratios, or again, that move ahead cohort survival over time. So I showed you kind of a 1 year view. They show more decimals and kind of over time, and really a blue indicates the grade progression ratio is lower than 1, and green indicates that it's higher than 1. And so if you look at this 24-25 year, that's where you see, kindergarten is about 1.07, and it was 1.08 the prior year. But there's been years that it's over 10%. So, and then first to second grade, so that's, to your point, Mark, is here's, we do grow beyond 1% in second grade. So this year it was about 2.4%. It's been as high as 3.9% in fall of '23. So, and then you can see down here, again, because of Running Start, 10 to 11 and 11, 12. And while they are lower, meaning more kids probably went to Running Start this year, they're not out of line with kind of past averages. And then lastly, this slide, which also has a lot of numbers on it, they put together a table showing the forecast accuracy. And so again, we sent him our October enrollment, and he immediately said, how did I do? You know, how did our projections do? And so this chart, and I'll focus kind of in the middle scenario, they produce a low, medium, and high scenario. And so overall, enrollment was 1.7% lower than their projection. And so you can see that Kindy had the largest variances in their projections. And when they shaded these blue shaded cells represent a grade level where enrollment was lower than the low scenario, and the orange shaded cells represent a grade level where enrollment was higher than the high scenario. So just, again, showing that these are kind of the grade levels where, you know, their projections were, had kind of a higher, you know, than average low point or high point. So, and again, K Elementary is continuing to exceed kind of their average. So, all right. So then lastly, I want to just on the fifth comprehensive high school process. So just a reminder that as part of the recommendation in April of '24, when we repurposed the 2022 construction levy funds to put additions and course space modifications at both Eastlake High School and Redmond High School, the board directed the superintendent to prepare a study and feasibility study regarding the evaluation of a fifth comprehensive high school. And it also directed the superintendent to prepare a study on the alternatives to addressing high school enrollment. That study was presented at the March 2025 board extended study session. And so where we go, and then I wanted to compare kind of where our enrollment assumptions versus our actual enrollment. So as we've shared on many slides, enrollment is lower than projected right now, which will continue to impact our long-range forecast. And so this is, you know, Flow provided the projections in January for October of '25, and they projected about 8,300 students, which was a slight growth from the prior year. We actually enrolled 8,146 students, 8,146, which was lower than the prior year. So it was 151 students lower than our projections. And this breaks it out by high school. So again, the majority of that decline is at Redmond and Eastlake High School. And so, again, so that's going to impact our long-range forecasts. And so really our kind of decision points or options for next steps is kind of moving forward with fifth comprehensive high school, holding, or we don't have enough information. So I think John's going to talk about next steps.
So there's a lot of information, so
Yeah.
we're happy to take questions about any of the enrollment data or anything, and also discuss fifth comprehensive high school considerations.
Director Stewart?
I seem to recall that the reimbursement rate is lower for a high school for the Running Start kids. Am I correct? Are they count as a full FTE or a partial?
Running Start is funded at a different rate than basic ed. So it's not lower or higher Running Start is only high school students.
Right.
So, but yes, it's funded at a different rate.
But do
And
we get
it
reimbursed
is
for less then?
Yes.
Okay.
But the funds primarily are passed through to our community colleges. So, So we count the Running Start students, and then the
But then we
community
have to pay
college
off.
bill us for the enrollment, and then we pay them that rate.
Maybe we need to look at some legislation to change that a little bit. Just a hint.
Sini or James? Who's grabbing the microphone?
I'll sorry, I'm trying to find the page number. Okay, there's no. It should be 19. It's one of the flow analytics. But I was wondering why our ratio of the people who are born, who are of age, and should be in kindergarten, are not enrolling. Like they're enrolling at a lower rate. Like where are they going? I'm assuming like. In previous years, we've had it up to like 88% or 92%. And at 76, we not only lose funding, but like 12 years in the future, that class is going to be much, much smaller than my class, for example. And are they going to private schools? Like, I'm just wondering if you have data on that.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't know where, because we don't track or, send, we don't track addresses and of all the families that were born, all the babies that were born 5 years ago. So, so we don't know exactly where they're going. Again, to Mark's point, some might just not be enrolling in school. Some might be going to private, kindergartners. There's only so much capacity in the system. And so, or potentially they're moving out of state, we don't know, or moving to a different part of the state.
I think the
So
other
that's
thing
more
is
work to come.
parents aren't required by law to notify us about
Right.
their intent to homeschool until age 8. And so there's no requirement for a parent who's choosing to homeschool their kindergartner to let us know that. So it's access to that information that we just, there's not a data set or a requirement of families to notify us.
Yeah. I guess it would be probably violating privacy laws or along those lines. But I was also wondering for the kindergarten class, which is like historically very, very low, doesn't that mean 12 years in the future or when they enter high school, when they become seniors, and I'm presuming that the 3 grades after the current kindergarten grade will be a similar small size. Are we looking to see how teachers might be impacted or how classroom sizes might be impacted?
So that's the reason that we use a demographer is to get, short-term and long-term projections, because that helps us think about the planning that needs to go into that. And so if this kindergarten class became the new standard of 1,700, and then we see about 110% of those kindergartners coming back as first graders, meaning first grade is higher enrollment, and then that is the class size that flows through. You can do the math relatively easily that that means about 2,000 to 3,000 students less in our district than what we currently have. We've seen a decline in our elementary schools. What, 14.5%, did you say? That's a lot of students. That's, I think, almost 2,000.
It's over 2,000.
It's over 2,000 students now. And so that actually doesn't affect class size, but what it does is affect school size. And so you have less teachers in our elementary schools than we previously did. And so, yes, all of those things, it affects a number of different systems. And for us, one of the things that we realized quickly was we had gotten relatively good, or at least accustomed to growing by 500 students a year, declining by 200 to 400 students a year. It takes different problem solving. It affects different things. It affects staffing differently. Like having budgeted having 200 students less than our budget means we actually have less revenue coming in, about $2.3 million less. Well, we already have contracts with staff, like they're already hired. And so as you're growing it's almost simple because you're just hiring more staff. Well, now you have to wait to right-size the system for an entire year. And so, and if you have that year over year, it's kind of a constant situation that you're always right-sizing the system based on reduced enrollment. So yeah, it's a complex problem that we'll continue to address.
Director Yoakum?
Okay, so it's given, my opinion, given the current enrollment trends and the educational specifications that we use today, I personally don't really see a clear path forward with a fifth comprehensive high school at this time. But our practice is targeting capacity rather than enrollment, from what I learned from the presentation at the Extended Study Day, that this kind of continues to shape that view. I guess what I'm wondering is, I'm interested in engaging our community around maybe what educational specifications should look like, and if there's sort of this interest in smaller schools, smaller enrollment. If that tends to be of interest, then is this potentially a possibility even given decreasing enrollment? I think right now what we expect from a high school today is probably going to look really different than from what we expected in 20, 30, 40 years. And I think in the way that we're thinking of it now, it doesn't seem to make sense with enrollment. But if high schools were, if we decided that it was for a lower enrollment, would it make more sense? I know there was the long-term facilities task force in the past, and I know that was with growth and how are we gonna, but is something like that, I know there's a facility advisory group, but has anyone ever been tasked with kind of looking more long-term and facilities and educational specifications and enrollment, and kind of taking all those, I went back and looked at the slides and taking all of the considerations into decision making, that this last part of the slides, like going forward. I don't know, has anyone ever thought about kind of having a group that focuses more on the long-term future of that and how it relates to facilities?
When you say the long-term future, do you mean long-term future of high schools in Lake Washington?
Correct. Yes.
Yes, we've talked about it. We've not done it.
Okay. Okay.
If the board isn't interested in considering a fifth comprehensive high school, then we probably wouldn't do that. But if the board is continuing to be interested in that, and today doesn't have to be the decision point, I would recommend the board talks about this every 6 months, to be honest with you, because even a short conversation, Vice President LaLiberty. And here's the reason why. Because if we delay for 3-4 years before we really revisit it, it's about a 10-year project to get a new high school online. And so any consideration of adding a high school it's a long-term project.
And I guess that consideration, I agree with you completely. And is it worth it to look at, if we're evaluating that every 6 months, are we evaluating it with the current educational specifications, with the current push with like planning for capacity and not necessarily enrollment? Meaning, does that lens need to shift before we, do we need to understand, I guess, what the community is looking for before we continue having those conversations moving forward of what it could look like? Is that kind of, I don't know if I'm clear enough. You're thinking, I'll let you go.
Are you talking about sort of re-envisioning what high school looks like, which could mean that, like even with our current set of high schools, it wouldn't necessarily mean building something new, which has kind of been the big question that the board has been grappling with. But you're saying sort of looking at what we want high school to be, and then that might back into the decision of doing a fifth comprehensive or not, based on sort of the outcomes of that.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yes. Thank you.
I have a couple questions on the data. I'll return to Director Yoakum's point later. I think about it. For kindergarten enrollment this year, in terms of by learning community, do we have a sense? I mean, was there like growth in one learning community but a drop in another? I mean, was it relatively evenly? It's a pop quiz, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
I have not updated our kind of by learning community comparison, so that's something we could look at.
Okay. It's sort of a minor point, but I'm just sort of, I think some of the triggers potentially for the board thinking about a fifth comprehensive high school was the projected future sizes of Redmond and Eastlake High School in terms of student enrollment. And so if there were, well, I don't, but potentially if somehow every kindergartner enrolled in the Redmond learning community and none in any of the other learning communities, then that would be maybe interesting. I guess I just want to make sure that I'm remembering right. From our conversation back in March, some of the data points we were looking at, or I think we were looking at, the big one was kindergarten enrollment for this upcoming year and whether that came at, where that came relative to the forecast. But I think another data point I believe that we were looking at was sort of the grade progression ratio for 8th to 9th, I guess, right? Because we had seen, that's something where in the prior year at least, the enrollment came higher than projection because the grade progression ratio, if my memory is right, came in higher than we anticipated. And I think when I look at this data now for 25-26, what I see is a grade progression ratio that looks, well, I don't know, it's hard to make sense. Sort of in between, right? I guess, right? It's sort of in between what we were at in 27, the sort of the pre-pandemic time, and what we looked at this last year. Does that sort of, am I looking at that right?
I mean, if I recall right, the question was, and that's when we did a 9th grade comparison to Burse as well, is are we, kids who might not be in our system, are they coming to us in high school? And so you're right, this data shows that last year we had kind of an uptick. The 8 to 9 grade progression ratio was consistently under 1, right? And last year it was 1.025. Yeah. So, so there was this uptick. Now we're at 0.999, so still kind of higher than it has been in the past. It isn't as high as it was last year.
Right. Okay.
But there isn't all of a sudden this large, the kids we had in 8th grade, we still have in 9th grade, but there isn't this large influx based on this data, at least this year, and so.
Okay. I have one more pop quiz question that I don't think anyone knows the answer to. I get like one theory I have to James's question earlier about the birth to enrollment ratio going down. One theory I have is just like the cost of living in our community is high. I know I have many friends who have kids. They're in an apartment and they want to buy a house and they move to more affordable, north and south. Sort of often is the pattern. And at least in the comparative, some of the districts that we have here, I mean, I see that, well, sort of a mixed bag again. I guess districts to Puyallup is growing, Kent, I was surprised to see, was not. Is this data, did you go district by district or is it on OSBI? Is there somewhere I could find?
OSBI does not have a September to September or an October to October comparison. Puget Sound ESD will put out some King County and Pierce County comparisons. and trends. So we had to put this data together manually from the OSPI,
All right.
you know, from each district's, what we call their P223 monthly report.
Okay, I will not
So-
increase the data ask then, at
Yeah.
all.
And
And I don't really know that would tell anything. I mean, because, you know, maybe I'm getting off prompt a little bit here, but, you know, some of the things at least I've been wondering about is for the ratio, like, how much of that is something attributable, something we can affect as a district, and how much is not? And it's still, maybe it's just always an unanswerable question. On the.
And there is some, again, anecdotal
Yeah.
data for smaller districts in the south, in Pierce County. Sumner Bonnie Lake is significantly growing.
Oh, really?
But they also have they have a large planned community, new homes being built in that district. So, so some of our Pierce County districts, to your point, are experiencing growth. Again, I don't list a lot of other districts besides Puyallup, but because most of them are much smaller. So,
Can I say one more thing? Okay. On the actual question, which was our sort of options, I feel comfortable that I have enough information to say that it is not a good use of resources to revisit this again anytime soon, with all respect to Dr. Holman. I don't, and actually, if you could push back again, if you disagree, I'd appreciate that. I don't see data, even before this. I think it was quite a stretch to say the forecasted data supported building an additional comprehensive high school. I don't see that. I don't think putting attention or resources into it is a good use of time or other resources. So I would recommend. My view is that we should keep this work in a drawer, and if things do suddenly change for a couple years in a row, then it would be revisited. But until there's a pretty dramatic change in enrollment patterns, I don't really see it for 20 years where building an additional comprehensive high school makes any sense. I do have some interest in exploring some engagement on does our current and I think this is to me this is sort of actually separate from the question of a fifth comprehensive high school, but does our current educational specifications meet the needs and the interests of our community? When I was on the facilities task force a decade ago, that was part of the remit, but it wasn't. I don't think it was a focus at all. I mean, the focus was we have booming enrollment. We have to, recent efforts have failed. What does the community want this to look like to address enrollment changes? So enrollment changes driving the thinking about educational specifications, not so much of that as a standalone. That's my memory, at least. So I do have some interest in maybe exploring whether that's something to do. Because my guess is the last time we actually touched the educational specifications has probably been, in a real way, has been quite a while. Is that?
I mean, it was after the 2014 long-term facility
Yeah,
task force,
but-
and that's when, I mean, the focus there primarily was because of the growth, and it was, build our
Or
schools
higher.
larger.
Yeah.
You did this, and anyway, build our schools larger because, prior to 2016, if we had a boundary that kept an enrollment, elementary school smaller, that's what when we rebuilt the school, we built it to the size that it currently was. And so the task force clearly said, build the schools larger so they can grow when the community grows. And so we increased the size of our elementary schools. We also set a standard for our middle schools. That was the 900, and then our high schools kind of had the standard of 1,800, and we didn't always build them immediately. That size, for example, Lake Washington, we built it to one size, and then we knew that we'd need to put an addition on to accommodate the growth there. So that's what we did.
And it might be a good time to update the ed spec anyway, because we're getting to the end of our, if you will, our modernization
Yes.
cycle. And so really the next phase of really school modernization
Yeah.
could be redefined by an ed spec. Maybe not the tear down and rebuild,
Right.
but what are the modifications or support spaces that are needed to implement an ed spec. So, yeah.
Director Stewart?
There we go. Looking at Kent, I'm not surprised. And I think we could also look at, if I recall correctly, Kent had a major financial setback for a couple of years. Am I correct? Wasn't that the school district that was like bankrupt, if you will? So I think that has a major impact on them. Granted, Bellevue had the financial troubles and North Shore had financial troubles, but it's nowhere near what Kent had. And I also seem to recall, too, when we discussed the 5th Comprehensive High School, staffing it and building it was a major, major dollar. And sticking in my mind, but I'm sure it's probably wrong because it's too damn big, but hundreds of millions of dollars, if I recall correctly. Or am I, again,
No,
wondering?
I think it's 400 million plus
Okay.
to
well,
build a
good.
comprehensive high school.
I was
I think you were asking about the staffing
Staffing,
costs.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's about
Three-quarters
3
million?
million, 3 to 4 million
but building
each year
and staffing
annually.
together,
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't see any sense in it then. I don't see any sense in it now. That said, continue monitoring. I mean, no hurt there, and also we can find out what maybe we need to adapt to what types of programming we're doing. I don't know, but I certainly don't see a need in any stretch of the imagination, even with my lack of confidence in demographers' accuracies long term. But I see no reason for this.
Director Yoakum?
And I think maybe we need to define what continuing means, because for me, continuing like on the path of making a decision right now with a comprehensive high school the way it looks as it does right now would be no. But I think the continuing of the discussion of what do we want high schools to look like in the future. And I went back and I feel like, so our average school, and what does it say, enrollment is 2,100 per high school. I feel this is from what I saw last year at the study session. And Seattle's is 1,300 students in their high school. And so if we decide that enrollment, having a lower enrollment at high school to have that experience, then it might warrant building a 5th comprehensive high school if we want lower enrollment with different programs or different options. So the way that we have it structured now, no. But if we engage with community and we see that there's different wants and desires, then potentially it might open that up to explore it again, depending on what we learn. So that's more my interest, so not just shut it down, but I think it's more shifting it to what would this look like? What does education at the high school level look like in 20, 30 years? That's more my thought.
Director Stewart?
My concern with that is I recall one of the reasons we have for certain high schools not having the robust programs that other high schools have is because they don't have enough kids to staff, or not staff, but to attend certain levels of study, whether it's trig or whatever. I seem to recall Juanita High School having lower numbers of enrollment for some of the very high degree math programs, and people complaining that, why should one school have it and another school doesn't? Well, there's not enough enrollment for it. If we then lower the enrollment across the board, I think you're going to have a lot of programs that are going to have to disappear. And I'd hate to see the music programs take even a bigger hit just because we want to have a fifth high school when it's not really needed.
Yeah, those are it's possibly what Director Yoakum is referring to. It's the give and takes of, like, there's pros and cons of having Eastlake High School at 2,400 students. There's also pros and cons to Tesla STEM being, what are they, 600? You actually have less choice at Tesla STEM than you do at Eastlake High School, which is so ironic that it's called a choice school. But students are choosing to participate in the pathway that Tesla offers, whereas our comprehensive high schools have, many more, science and math and, all the things you just referenced. And even, I'm looking at this slide on my my laptop as well. Even in that, Juanita High School has less opportunity to offer kind of unique standalone courses compared to Eastlake, yet those that they do, students have greater levels of access just because of percent of. So it is all pros and cons, and so if that's a direction we want to go, we would have to map out what that looks like in terms of just even studying and engaging around it. That's a pretty in-depth, significant process.
Director Yoakum?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I would want to know is what resources are required to have for that process, right? It sounds nice and we can sit here and have this conversation, but there are resources going towards that. And is that worth it? And I think to your point as well, I think it's hard to stop and look at what we have now and try and think of that in 30 years. Like, that is the case now, but in 30 years, if we have, high schools at 1,000 students, I mean, I don't even think we can envision right now what opportunities could be available of partnering with businesses, or what do these facilities look like, or we have the buildings right now with space, but I think it just takes a kind of an innovative lens of looking at it. But if we're comparing it to the school of today, then no. But I think we don't know what that will look like. So I think kind of like keeping this open mind of what it could be. But ultimately, I think it comes down to the cost of the resources to be able to put something together, to be able to engage with community.
Okay,
Go for it,
guess
James.
I want to bring something up that Hamsami, Director Yoakum, and I talked about last night in our meeting, and that's, like, I guess, innovation in education, and something that I brought up, and I think a lot of people can agree with, is that education is, like, very slow to innovate or progress compared to technology. And I think the same is for, like, policies or legislation. It's the same thing. And so I guess my question is, or I guess my comment is that, or it's both, how are we as a school district going to be innovators in education? And I think it doesn't have to be necessarily technological innovations like we see with, like, AI or, like, in, like, research, but in other ways too, especially considering we're in, like, I guess, the hub of innovation. I feel like, especially considering Seattle and, like, all the tech companies that are here.
Director Liberty?
This is an interesting conversation, but I'm just sort of reflecting on how much of what we're talking about is really a board decision versus Dr. Holman's decision, or should be. How we ended up, my memory again, is how we ended up here is when the board adopted the resolution to expand to authorize the expansion of Redmond High School and Eastlake High School. Tagged onto that was direction to the superintendent to conduct this study, fifth comprehensive high school evaluation study. That's happened now. And I think, well, I've already provided my feedback on it. So I guess, like, I still am, like, I have an interest as, I guess, a community member in, like, looking at educational specifications, doing some engagement on that. But I do think, like, if, one, I'm hesitant to, like, explicitly provide that direction. And two, if we do, I think it's important that, like, to what end, like, what are we, in service of what? Like, I mean, if it's, if we do adopt new policy language around enrollment, if our concern is related to that, and like we want to be explicit that, like, to be in compliance with some enrollment related policy, that we're directing the superintendent to do something that we think as a board will drive it. I don't know, but yes, I think it's helpful to have this conversation and provide this direction, but I don't want to be so prescriptive as a board member as to, like, directing the system to do engagement on ed specs, unless we're really being really thoughtful about why we're doing it. And I'm not quite there yet. I mean, I have an interest, again, I think as a community member, but not as a board member. Okay, finished.
Director Stewart?
Quick question, and I don't know if there's an answer, but what the hell, it hadn't stopped me before. When you lower the student to teacher ratio, what kind of financial impact does that have on a district of saying, trying to shoot for 15 kids per room versus 30 kids per room, or whatever number you choose to pick? It would seem to me that it would be, even in diminishing population, you'd be talking about a tremendous financial impact to try and make those small classrooms smaller, because you'd have to still have either the same, even in diminishing a role of population, you still would have to have increases in number of classes or classrooms, or teachers, I should say. Am I missing something there?
Every time you reduce class size, it increases cost because you're hiring, more educators. It also takes more space. If you increase class size, you obviously are saving money and using less space. So yes, all of that kind of goes hand in hand.
Any other thoughts, questions? I guess I can throw my hat in the ring. I don't think it's a surprise that I wasn't convinced at all in March that we needed to proceed with a fifth comprehensive high school, and these numbers certainly don't change my mind on that. I think we will naturally revisit, since we're never going to stop talking about enrollment ever. So as we go through each year, if there's a major change in direction, then we should definitely revisit. But to be really clear, it would be a really significant change in direction. So that's where I'm at. And revisiting the ed spec or thinking differently, I do think we should be keeping that in mind, or making sure that we're giving the resources to be innovative, especially now that we're in a situation where it's a very different situation. We're no longer in the, how can we, like, what were some of the crazy things we were doing, like turning closets into, spaces for student learning, and like, having classrooms that you could only get to through another classroom, because that's just where we were with enrollment and trying to fit as many students as we could into the physical space that we had. So having a little more physical space does give the opportunity to think differently about how we use space, or to consider things that we couldn't think of before because we were like, we literally cannot even really fit in the students that we've got today. So yes, without being overly prescriptive, but just making sure that that's an ongoing conversation with the board of are there things that we want to do that we think that we could do, and then what are the resources that we would need to put towards that. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I appreciate the update on enrollment, even though I think we would all love these numbers to be higher, but it's just different. Well, it's never boring here. Anything else? Since there are no other agenda items, the October 20th, 2025 study session is now adjourned at 6:10 p.m.